Welcome back to my art channel. It's already time for another sketchbook tour, as I finished this tiny one just a few days ago. This sketchbook is a Hahnemühle travel booklet in the small 9x14cm size, with 140g paper and only 20 sheets of paper, so it was perfect for a more focused theme, and it didn't take me as long to finish as usual. Though the earliest sketches here are from spring 2024. I remember getting this on a whim when I dropped by the homie art shop in Seoul and then filled the first few pages on that trip, just sitting and doodling in cafes or at the airport. It's a simple sketchbook, but I really like the stitch binding and the little embossing, and it even has a little pocket in the back. The first page is just a collection of painting ideas I had to get out of my system. I really had no specific plan for the sketchbook, but wanted a place to jot down thumbnail sketches. But I ended up really liking the feel of the paper for proper drawing, so I then moved to the next page for a more elaborate study. So these aren't travel sketches, even if the sketchbooks are called travel booklets, and I was literally traveling. But sitting somewhere and just drawing, not my environment, no urban sketching, but concept sketches or portrait practice, something completely unrelated to where I am, feels very relaxing to me. Similar to sitting in a cafe and reading a good book, or indulging in any other hobby. So I just have a folder of reference images I want to study with on my phone for when the mood strikes. I used black colored pencils after the first pencil guidelines because I didn't have fixative spray with me, of course, and colored pencils smudge less. I also love really pushing the dark black color for contrast. I had footage of this sketching process in an old art vlog, and it's fun to see how much shorter the Carandash Luminance Black now is. After drawing that portrait study, I thought that the format would work really beautifully for a movie study as well, and picked another reference from a different folder on my phone because I have a whole bunch of those. It's not really an iconic scene from the Lord of the Rings trilogy at all, but I like how the lighting frames Eowyn here, and how it's nearly monochrome and so simpler to adapt into a black and white study. So quite similar to the previous sketch, actually. But here I went with subtler shading, tried to create patterns and textures in the background, and even small lighting accents that I quite like. By the way, I want to fill an entire spread with just Lord of the Rings color studies. I just haven't had a full morning to sit down, watch the entire extended edition of Fellowship of the Ring and sketch for the entire movie durations, but soon, now that the days are getting colder and art events are slowing down. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you might remember that colored pencils in various muted and grey tones took over my sketchbooks last year. This here is a part of that, a scene study of Agashi, the handmaiden, with this Mars Violet, which is a gorgeous warm purplish grey, and a greenish grey from this really cheap brand called Marco Renoir. I buy these pencils open stock and can only find them at the art shop in Seoul, not locally on Jeju. So in the meantime, the closest match to it I found is the Cadet Blue from the RTX colored pencil set, both in color and in feeling. This isn't about realistic colors or even realistic shading, but about warm and cool contrast, and I try to break down this more complex scene along those lines with warm and cool grey shades. Now looking back, this is also the most complex environment, really, from all of these scenes, which probably says something about me avoiding environments in favor of portrait close-ups. And of course, while these two pencils were the main colors in this sketch, I also used black colored pencils for proper contrast. Villeneuve's Dune is great for nearly monochromatic studies, because in that movie it's really all about scale and lighting, and there's very little color, except for some really interesting accents. with the planet overwhelmed by intense, high-key lighting and otherwise just shades of sand and grey. I tried to separate the values very clearly here with these black shadow shapes that I simplified a lot, and then there's the blown out highlights of the background that I barely hinted at. And just as I'd settled into this being a movie scene sketchbook, I ended up with a master study in here instead. Moonlight Magic by Dean Cornwell. It's just a small detail study as I wanted to draw more shadow shapes, similar to the previous page. And Cornwell is amazing for those. While I like to have themes for sketchbooks because they can be a challenge or give me inspiration when I don't know what to draw, that doesn't stop me from then tossing them out and from then drawing something different in there. The Derwent Lightfast are a really great compromise between softness and precision, so while I might reach for the luminance black for the most intense of darks or for expressive textures, the Derwent Lightfast are wonderful for details and more subtle shading. And I love how this raisin shade here contrasts with the green grey, making it look redder than it really is. I went back to not quite movie scene studies with a still from the TV series Midnight Mars. This, as well as The Haunting of Hill House and Bly Manor, is one of my favorite shows in years. While this sketch is pretty simple, the expression of Father Paul was actually incredibly challenging for me. The head is tilted upwards, eyes and mouth open, and overall he's facing slightly to the right, which I find harder than left-facing portraits. And so I ended up going back in with a bit of white gouache to make the eyes really pop. Can you see that the white of the eyes is brighter than the more natural white of the paper? I actually really like this approach and completely forgot about it until now, so I'll have to give it more tries in the future. Though I did use mixed media again on the next sketch, which also upset my nice horizontal format that I had going. So again, yeah, I had a theme, but it wasn't set in stone. Still kinda annoyed by it now. Bev Keane is an amazing villain, also from Midnight Mars, but I don't think I captured her well, getting too distracted by all these mixed media attempts here. The next 3 sketches are all from a single evening. We had friends stay at our place, and so after dinner we were just chatting and I was doodling in this. A quite bad Keanu Reeves from John Wick. Our friend's daughter helped me by drawing some tiny hearts in here. It's quite stylized, even more than my usual sketches, with this very simplified face that I find both strangely a bit charming and a really bad likeness. The lighting at our dinner table isn't great, so I just stuck to the single shade of grey at first. Next, I quickly sketched this scene from Chunking Express, an old favorite. I remember getting really frustrated with this one. It's a similar angle as the Midnight Mars one, with that upward tilt and facing to the right. And I just couldn't get the proportions and the nose to look how I wanted them to. While the paper of these sketchbooks is really pleasant to draw on, it's also quite delicate. Too many layers, too much pressure, or too much erasing can make the texture of it uneven, and you can see where around the eyes I hit the limit of layering. Now that I'm looking at both these sketches, I'd actually love to give them a try in color again. While most of the scenes in here are selected for how well they work as monochrome studies, from the barely lit Eowyn to the somber Handmaiden or the generally not colorful Dune, both John Wick and Chunking Express are all about colorful lighting, often even neon colors, and I think these monochrome sketches don't do them justice. I've got this new sketchbook that I want to fill with color studies, so maybe they'll make a return there. I'm much happier with the third sketch from that night. I went back to simple pencil, and while I was of course still distracted, maybe having the other 2 sketches to warm up with had gotten the worst of it out of my system. This is a scene from The Haunting of Bly Manor, and I combined the Blackwing matte for the heavier textures with an HB and a 4B pencil. I really liked this one, even the likeness turned out alright, I think. It took me a while to come back to this sketchbook. I remember using it a lot last winter, as my sketching habits always go through phases. Here a scene from Alien, which has great harsh lighting. I used similar shading techniques here with tighter rendering on the face and then more expressive strokes in the shadows, hair and background. This was around the time I discovered the Asaro head for the first time, and you might spot the influence in how suddenly my cheekbones and the facial planes overall become more angular. The Black Swan study was an experiment and a bit of a miss. The side of her face hit by the spotlight I'm actually quite happy with, as I tried to create shading with only vertical lines. And it went alright, but the side of her face in shadow really falls apart anatomically, with the eye placed completely wrong. I remember going over the area with black colored pencil multiple times to try and improve it, only to kinda make it worse. This is a practice sketchbook and the vertical lines were fun, so that's all that matters. Nosferatu scenes have shown up in my watercolor sketchbook as well, another movie great for nearly monochrome studies. I exaggerated her features here, shading in the nasolabial folds and eye bags more intensely than the reference, to give that more unsettling look. So not a flattering sketch at all, but I like the strained, unsettling smile. This was also a good wake-up call to maybe pick more scenes with expressive characters instead of the mostly moody, blank faces I often gravitate to. I wish I had been more decisive with my colored pencils, maybe the entire background just blue-gray or a more intense violet for the flowers. There's this balance I'm trying to find in this sketchbook between value studies that teach me about lighting, learning more about portraits and figures, even expressions, the actual likeness of an actor or actress, and then also finding an art style to make these my own interpretations. The next sketch might actually be my favorite when it comes to style. I remember really focusing on creating interesting patterns and textures with my pencil strokes, simplifying faces, unifying shadow shapes. So while the likenesses aren't great, I think it matches the vibes of the movie In the Mood for Love well. After my personal highlight, here comes my least favorite. I'd been wanting to sketch a scene from Pride and Prejudice for a while, but I'd also wanted to use those vertical lines again, and this happened. It might be interesting if I pursued a more consistent line work style or made the face more realistic to contrast with the abstract patterns, but instead it's just an experiment that didn't really go anywhere. The next sketch returned to the more expressive shading with the Blackwing matte. We watched Decision to Leave that night, and as I'd already seen the first half of the movie, I spent that time drawing. The wallpaper behind Tang Wei had this abstract mountain pattern, so I expressed that as pencil textures here. There's a bit of a time skip in between the sketch from Decision to Leave and then this. The likeness here for this scene from Jennifer's body might be one of the better ones, actually. I'd only rarely used this sketchbook in spring and summer, enamored by gouache and painting outdoors, but in October I felt in the mood for some spooky or darker movie scenes. I used the 4B pencil and the Blackwing here, and you can see how much lighter the 4B looks, even though they feel similarly soft when using them. Jennifer's Body is another movie with beautiful colors, so that and In the Mood for Love should really show up again as gouache studies one day. Let me know if you have any recommendations for movies that are perfect for color studies or value studies. On the other hand, here we go back to Dune 2 in this case. I was feeling in the mood for close-up faces and slower shading, using a B pencil, a 4B graphite by Cretacolor, and then the Blackwing again for those darkest hues. By the way, now that I think about it, why didn't I pick a scene from just a bit earlier in the movie, from the outdoor scenes on GAD Prime, with that infrared lighting effect? That would have been a really interesting study, so here's a reminder to future Abby to give that a go. When thinking back to the earlier studies in this sketchbook, I've continuously moved closer and closer with my camera, often cropping the scenes I select even further to get as close to the faces as possible. I just love portraits, and movie scenes make for such wonderful subjects to study. As cinematographers, directors, a whole team of creatives have brought these intricate, beautiful scenes to life that I then get to learn from. It's not the same as drawing portraits from life, or even more realistic or naturalistic photographs of people. It's the dramatic shadows, the styling and posing, the exaggeration and drama that draws me to them as study subjects. On the other hand, that does mean that I approach these portraits more as collections of light and shadow. I don't really measure or construct my portraits, so that's probably why the likenesses of all of these are so hit or miss. And it becomes more obvious the more I go for realistic shading. But I just really enjoy the process, and this was great to relax in between other things. For the very last page, let's give something really challenging a go. A scene from the trailer of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I'm beyond excited to see the actual movie, as Del Toro has shaped a lot of my love for movies ever since I saw Pan's Labyrinth. For the last page, I wanted to draw everything I struggle with the most. That extreme upward tilt of the head, a face turned to the right, short lighting, meaning most of the face that's turned towards the viewer is in shadow, with the light hitting the far, turned away side of the face, and a strained expression of horror, pain, or despair. And, honestly, beards. So Oscar Isaac again after already showing up in my Dune 1 sketch, but now much closer and at a more difficult, less structured angle. And this turned out to be the sketch that captured the likeness of a person least. Which, well, that's actually great because it motivates me to keep going. After all, these Hahnemühle travel booklets come in sets of 2, so I still have another one that can be and should be filled. So I am very open to suggestions. For value studies, I like to focus on movies with pretty toned down color palettes but interesting shadows. Though it's also a fun challenge to translate very colorful scenes into black and white. I think what this first one taught me was a sense of the art style and shading that I want to pursue, and the kinds of scenes I'm interested in capturing and learning from. But it also showed me where I need to get out of my comfort zone. More varied characters of all ages, and especially more intense facial expressions of all kinds. Especially on a small format like this, where every small deviation completely changes proportions and expressions, I want to become more precise in my observations. Maybe construct and measure the portraits a bit to get a better result, but still keep it natural and flowy in my shading. I'd also like to go back to a few long shots or medium shots, so full body or half body figures with more environment. While I love portraits the most, it's body language and proportions and anatomy that I struggle with the most. So I needed that reminder. I ended up with a Victor Frankenstein that doesn't look like the reference at all, but I still like the shading and I'm very happy that I've completed this small project. While I never start sketchbooks with the goal of filling them quickly, I usually have multiple sketchbooks and I'm perfectly happy to hop from one to another when I want to use different art materials or want to practice a specific subject. It still feels nice to, for once, fill one in less than 2 years. Let's ignore that this one had only 20 pages. Let me know if you have a favorite sketch among these, and again, if you have any movie suggestions both for my color and for my black and white studies in future sketchbooks. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.